What is up, Gathering Network friends and family? I'm excited to introduce to you our first ever adults-only two-part series on sexuality, coming to you February 21st and 28th. Recently, we have been unpacking this idea of attachment, how we connect to God, self, and others. In particular, how our early experiences have marked us and still impact how we do relationship today. Sexuality is an integral part of the human experience, and we all have pain in this area. The problem is, too often the church has not really been a safe place for people to explore issues of sexuality, so it has become mired in shame, judgment, and isolation. Our goal is to bring the topic of sexuality back into the context of safe, loving, spiritual family. And we have a stellar guest to help us do that. Jay Stringer is a pastor, therapist, researcher, and author who is going to invite us to turn toward our own sexual stories with love and curiosity, so that we can discover deeper truths about our attachments that help us heal and grow into people who are becoming more and more fully alive in Christ. Please check out our webpage here, as there are a few important things to consider before watching, such as being mindful of our kiddos, thinking through your own personal readiness, and also thinking about watch group dynamics. We love you, we are with you, and we are for you. And we can't wait until February 21st and 28th when we get to dive in to our first ever adults-only conversation with our special guest, Jay Stringer. See you soon.
Good morning, Gathering Network. My name is Jen Owens, and this is my daughter, Haley, and we are just so glad to be with you guys this morning. So we want to welcome you to the Gathering Network Sunday service for today. I have been thinking a lot over 2020 and into 2021, how important just rhythms are, the patterns we're finding ourselves in, or maybe making new patterns. And this is one of those patterns that have kind of become a new pattern for us, is gathering around these Sunday services, whether you're in a home with your family or whether you're gathering with a few friends for a watch group. This is a newfound rhythm for you, and it matters to your heart formation and it matters to God. So thanks for joining us. We're just so glad that you're here. And we're going to go and jump over and look at some announcement slides. So we'll be back in just a minute with our call to worship.
I get the privilege this morning of bringing you an update on our monthly all-together rhythm here at the Gathering Network, and we just wanted to make sure you knew for the next several months you can go ahead and mark the first Sunday of the month for our all-together. Sunday, March 7th, we will join each other again on Zoom at 10 a.m., which we want to just say a special, deep, heartfelt thank you to many of you who have joined us in that space and have been so faithful there. And then the second thing I want you to know is Sunday, April 4th, which is Easter Sunday, you guys. Easter Sunday, we are going to reconvene our outdoor monthly all together with each other, and there will be signups, there will be details, there will be things to know that will come over the next several weeks, but we just wanted to make sure you could get that on your calendar and plan ahead to be there.
Good morning, everybody. Glad to see you. Hey, this is a special invitation to those of you guys who are new or even newer to the Gathering Network. Like maybe you've been here less than a year, or maybe you've been here a little bit longer than that, but you don't really feel connected. Like maybe you have questions that need to get answered and you'd like some time just to get a little bit more oriented to our life together here at the Gathering Network. All right, here's what we're doing. We are going to host a new to the network Zoom on February 28th at 2:30 p.m. You can RSVP today at gatheringnetwork.org. That will be up in the announcement banner for the next couple of weeks. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to just RSVP today. We're going to send you an email and we're just going to be asking for your questions. It's like, what do you want to know? What do you want to know about the Gathering Network and how can we help you out? That's happening February 28th at 2:30 p.m. Mark your calendars, RSVP today, and we'll see you then. Can't wait to be with you.
Okay, Haley's going to read our call to worship this morning, which comes from Psalm 28, verses 6 through 9.
Blessed be the Lord, for he has heard the voice of my pleas for mercy. The Lord is my strength and my shield. In him my heart trusts, and I am helped. My heart exults, and with my song I give thanks to him. The Lord is the strength of his people. He is the saving refuge of his anointed. O save your people and bless your heritage. Be their shepherd and carry them forever.
I have taken a lot of hope in this scripture lately, mostly from two little quick sections. The very beginning, where it says, he's heard the voice of my pleas for mercy. I know just this past weekend, my other daughter, Brooklyn, was sharing with me how she feels like sometimes God doesn't hear her prayers. And I feel like we can all resonate with that sometimes we're praying to God and talking and we aren't sure that he hears what we're saying. But I can take such hope and comfort in this passage that says he's heard the voice of my pleas for mercy. There's another part of a psalm that says the Lord bends his ear to listen to us. And I really love that imagery, just this idea that God's ear is turned towards us, that his heart is turned towards us as we're talking to him, as we're praying to him. And then even at the very end of this passage, be their shepherd and carry them forever. You know, one of my favorite verses as of late comes from John, where it talks about how we are the sheep and we hear his voice. He's the shepherd. We hear the shepherd's voice. And I think that we've all been encouraged by that, you know, the last several years, just knowing that we hear his voice. But I also like knowing that since he's our shepherd, that he's familiar with our voice, that our voice is heard by him. When we speak, he's bent his ear and he says, hey, that's a familiar voice. I know Jen's voice. I know Haley's voice. He knows your voice. And that is really giving me so much hope that he listens and he hears and he knows our voices. So as we get ready to pray this morning, I just want to invite you guys to just open up your hands in a place of surrender. I love this posture before God because it just reminds me that he's in control, that he's my strength. I can trust in him, just like this passage says that my heart can trust in him. This place of surrender is where we can go. So if you'll open your hands as I pray over you this morning, as we head into worship, we can be certain that he is hearing the cries of our heart when we worship. Father, I thank you for my family and friends in the Gathering Network. I thank you that your ear is bent towards us, towards our needs. You hear our praises. You hear our hearts cry, and I'm so grateful for that. God, I just ask that you would invade every home this morning, that they would sense your presence as we worship you. They would sense your presence as the word is brought forth, God, that they would take confidence in knowing that we have a God who hears the cries of our heart. Father, would you bless their time of worship this morning as we sing and lift our voice before you. In Jesus' name. Amen.
I will sing of your goodness. I will sing of your love. Though the seasons come quickly, you have always been enough. Though the night may get darker, though the waiting seems long, you have always been faithful to remind me of your love. And oh, you are good. In the morning I'll sing, you are good. have always been patient. You have always been kind. You're consistent through the ages. Oh, what a friend of mine. So I'll remind my soul to bless you, standing firm upon your truth, knowing you cannot be shaken, because I've seen what you can do. And oh, you are good. In the morning I'll sing you are good. In the evening I'll sing you are good. You are good to me. You're so good to me.
Gathering Network fam, I'm so glad to welcome you to church again this morning. Thanks for joining us. Really excited that we get another opportunity to dive into the second part of our interview with Bonnie Poonzall. If you were with us last time, you had an opportunity to hear Bonnie take us on this journey through her research. She's a psychologist from Cambridge, England, and did a lot of extensive research on the doctrinal beliefs that we hold about God versus the experiential life that we have in God. And if you haven't had an opportunity to go back or to catch up with where we started with the first part of our interview with Bonnie, I would highly encourage you to do that, because her research and findings are confirming that our attachment stories, our attachment experiences have directly and powerfully impacted our life in God. So not just only our relationship with other people or our relationship with ourselves, but also our relationship with God. So her research is amazing. Her teaching is amazing. So go back and be sure to catch up on part 1 of our interview with Bonnie. And then here we are today in part 2, where she's going to share more of her personal story. And you guys, I gotta be honest, this is my favorite one. This is my favorite part of our conversation with Bonnie. It's incredible. It's a little longer than our previous one, than our first one. So I'm just going to get right into it. Introduce you again to our new friend, Miss Bonnie Poonzall.
Wow. Well, we're trying to discover how we can grow our attachment to God by exploring and making sense of our attachment stories, primarily through our experience with our primary caregivers as children. And we know that that's the way toward healing. And in your story, how did you make sense of or process your anger with God, and did your personal attachment story apply at all?
Yeah. So let me go back to exploring our attachment stories first. Yeah. So you're right. We're both big fans of Pete Scazzero, and I really think that that nugget, we cannot know God more fully if we don't know ourselves more fully, is true. The word heart appears over 800 times in the Bible. Our heart pumps blood around our bodies. It keeps us alive. It's the most precious part of our bodies. It's the seat of our emotions. And our heart health is very much related to our spiritual health and our physical health. And we know this with research on negative emotions. Scientific research on negative emotions show that they have consequences on our bodies. Poorly regulated negative emotions affect our immune system, our brain functioning, our hormonal balance, heart, blood pressure, and so on. So to separate our kind of spiritual health from our heart health, from our bodily health, seems to me to do a disservice of the way God made us to be
Yes.
integrated beings. So like I have little kids, and you have little kids too. We all know what it's like when they're hangry. Like there's no reasoning. The body and their emotions, their bodies, their ability to reason completely tied up with one another. And so to not pay attention to that, it really, to me, is like ignoring a really fundamental part of how God made us, and then how to therefore learn more about ourselves through it.
Absolutely.
So talking about attachment and attachment to God. So we primarily know God relationally. And the whole story of Christianity is about God wanting to establish relationship with us. And so our relational stories matter too, because the building blocks of our relationship with God, and the building blocks of the kind of relationship that God wants us to have with him, comes from our attachment relationships. So we talk about attachment patterns, but there's something else in attachment that is also really interesting here, which is this notion of internal working models. So there are ways in which attachment typologies describe how we interact, but attachment typologies also describe what psychologists call internal working models of self and others. And these are kind of like scripts, or like our kind of understanding of us in relation to others, our understanding of others in relation to us and to the world. So they're kind of like these internal working models. And we develop them through our attachment relationships, and they affect how we view ourselves, how we view other people, and our view of the world. And so I think you guys might have talked about different attachment typologies already, but for people who have secure attachment relationships, they tend to have positive internal working models of themselves and of others. So these kinds of models say things like, I deserve love and help. I don't have to earn it. People are willing to love me and help me. The world is good. And these kinds of models about oneself and others develop out of consistently reliable and sensitive interactions with the attachment figure in childhood. And research shows that about 60% of the general population that have been studied fall into this category, this secure attachment category. Then there's insecure. One form of insecure attachment typology is the avoidant typology. And for these people, they have positive internal working models of themselves as strong and sufficient, but they also have implicitly negative internal working models of others. So they'll say things like, I need to rely on myself because other people are unreliable or have been unreliable. When I'm distressed, I don't need to show it because I can fix it myself. I'll look to other things, not people, to help me cope. I will not ask for help. I don't show my feelings. And this comes out of attachment experiences in childhood where the attachment figure was consistently unreliable and insensitive. And I'd mentioned that their negative internal working model of others is implicit because often if you ask them, they won't say that. They won't say that other people are unreliable. Right. And they may not even be fully aware that their internal working model of others is negative. But they typically avoid talking about or engaging with their own emotions, needs, and desires, or that they find that they don't know how to talk about it. They don't like to talk about what's bothering them, but they're perfectly happy to talk about other sort of less personal matters. And people in this kind of avoidant category are represented by about 15 to 20% of the populations in the world that have been surveyed, have been studied. And there's another typology of insecure attachment, which is resistant or ambivalent. Or you might have heard me say anxious ambivalent. So they're the same. And for people in this category, their internal working model of themselves and of others is generally pretty incoherent. So they both kind of view themselves as unlovable and unworthy of care, and they often see themselves as helpless to do anything about it. When they've also experienced their attachment figures to be inconsistently available. So this kind of like on-off kind of pattern in how responsive their attachment figures have been. When the attachment systems of these kinds of people are activated, they feel strong anger and separation protest. And interestingly, the reason I said that their internal working model is incoherent is because that anger signifies that they think of themselves as deserving of love and attention and help. So they both think of themselves as not deserving it, but their emotional response shows that they think they should be deserving of more than what they're getting. Yeah. And they also see their attachment figures in a kind of incoherent way. They may at the same time see the attachment figure as a rescuer, but also as untrustworthy or disappointing and unreliable. And they're often, this is the group that is hypervigilant about monitoring the proximity of the attachment figure. And they're often untrusting and jealous if their attachment figure momentarily gives attention to somebody else or something else. And so this represents about 5 to 10% of the population. So most people are in the secure category. Some are, in the avoidant category, and fewer are in this kind of third anxious ambivalent category. And there are actually cultural differences too. There are not very many cross-cultural studies, but we are seeing, but what data there are available shows that there are cultural differences. So for example, in China, the proportions are a little different. In China, it's more like, and it's only one study, so it's not, it may be wrong. But in China, it's 50% secure, 20 to 25 avoidant, 20 to 25 anxious ambivalent.
Interesting. Yeah, that's super interesting.
So all of these to say, our attachment experiences help us form these internal working models of oneself and other people, especially in these relational contexts and terms. And and I've mentioned before that the research is pretty consistent that there's a degree of internal working model correspondence, which means the working models you have of others transfer across different attachment relationships.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean they don't change, and attachment patterns do change, especially in light of really robust, strong, disconfirming evidence. So, if you have often experienced unavailable attachment figures, but then you meet somebody who really is different to what you've experienced before, those working models can change. They're not static, they're plastic.
Neuroplasticity. Wow.
And but the important thing is that we bring to new relationships the patterns of relating to people that we've learned in the past, and we bring those into our relationship with God.
Man, that is just fascinating. That is just really, 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 amazing. I think you just distilled down one of in fact, if we were to restart it, the whole thing over again, I just found it in, what's his name? Tim Clinton. He wrote a book called Attachments, and he just has a simple graph, and it's just that secure is like positive self, positive others.
Exactly.
And he just, and ambivalent would be, negative self, positive others. Right. Avoidant would be positive self, negative others, and then the dismissive would be negative self, negative others. And I was like, man, if we could have just gone back and started the whole attachment conversation around that, like, do you typically feel positive about yourself, positive about others? It would have been a first lens and a first grid. And you've just really built that out for us today, and we're going to hang on to that. That is awesome.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so now about your attachment story. Let's dive in there a little bit. Like, how does that play out in your life? How has all of this played out in your own story a little bit? You mind going there?
No. It's a little scary to go there because it's never comfortable to kind of talk about your past, especially your past in relation to caregivers, especially to caregivers who have by and large done everything they could for you. Yes. So I think people often don't like to talk about it because it seems to imply ungratefulness or something. And that's just that's not true.
Yeah.
And I really think that, that's the more we know ourselves, the more we can be loving to others, and the more God can enter in to bring healing where healing is needed. So how has my attachment history played out and how I experienced God? So I actually have very little memory of my childhood. I don't know if that's less than other people, but I don't have a lot of it. And I know that. I know that when I was young, when I was a baby, I lived with my two grandmothers because my mother and father were both working parents, and my mother was a school teacher. And back in the 80s, maternity leave just didn't really exist in Hong Kong. I think she got like 4 weeks or something like that, which is... Anyway, so my mom went right back to work, and I lived with my grandmothers. My parents would come after work every day to see me, but they would then leave after dinner, and then I would just stay there. And I guess I didn't really know that different. And as far as I'm aware, my grandmothers were very warm and attentive and sensitive. Like, I just loved them, and they were sweet and wonderful and kind. My parents are not emotional people at all, or rather they don't really express their emotions. I don't know if it's that they're Chinese or it's that they just don't express their emotions, but I don't really have any memories of them saying directly to me, I love you. And it may be that we just don't do that in Chinese culture. I don't know. But we just never really talked about feelings. They would move heaven and earth for me, and I know that, but I have no recollection of them saying things like, I love you, or I'm proud of you. And in fact, what I would hear is like other people telling me that. Like, I'd have other people say, your parents love you so much, or your parents are so proud of you, but I actually don't have a episodic memory of them saying that to me. Anyways, when I was 9, I moved to Canada for a few years as part of this big exodus of Hong Kong folks immigrating to foreign countries because of concerns about Hong Kong, eventually returning to China. And my father was an advertising executive, and he continued living in Hong Kong and working there because he was in charge of this big advertising firm, while my mother and my brother and I moved to this foreign country where we had no friends, where English was a second language for my mother, and it actually is for me too, even though I don't sound like it.
Right.
And and she was about my age when she moved there, and I have 3 kids now, and I just think, golly, I do not want to be thinking about moving by myself with my kids to a foreign country, learning to drive, figuring how to pay bills, just all those things, to have to do that alone. Like, I moved here, and my husband is here. It's a hard enough work when there's 2 of you. It's even harder when there's 1. So I can only imagine how hard it was for her and how lonely it must have felt for her. And maybe she just didn't have the emotional resources to do much more than what she did for us. And so I remember that period of my life as a pretty lonely time. I remember having a really wonderful teacher. I remember feeling quite sad that when I was there, I was very aware of the fact that I only really had 1 friend, that kids weren't particularly nice. But I couldn't really talk to my mom about it. I mean, first, because we don't really talk about our feelings, I didn't really have that vocabulary to begin with. And second, there wasn't anything she could do about it. And so I just kind of kept it all in. And my father wasn't there, obviously. So that experience happened long after my infant years. But I think it might have contributed to this emotional avoidance that is a sort of default for me, especially compared to my husband, who just grew up in a family where they talked about feelings and emotions and interior states just all the time. Like, I'm always really struck by how he comes home from a work day. He's like, I just want to tell you how I'm feeling. And then when he asks me, so how are you feeling? And I'm like, fine. And it's not even like I'm deliberately trying to be avoidant. It's just like, it just doesn't come naturally to me. And it could be a temperament thing too. But anyways, this is what you do when you psychoanalyze yourself. Right. So anyways, when I was in high school, I had another experience that I think also contributed to this kind of avoidant tendency that I have. And I think more directly contributed to my anger at God. So there was a girl who I was really good friends with for a couple years. I think it was middle school age. So I think I was like 12, age 12 and 15 or 14. She was like my best friend. We were in the same classes together. We would go to each other's house and hang out all the time. And then there was one summer when I came back from the summer holiday, she just stopped talking to me. And I don't remember I was like, I couldn't understand why. Nothing had happened. And she just decided somebody else was going to be her best friend. And it was never explained. And she just pretty much ignored me until she moved away from Hong Kong. And I've sometimes wondered if that's why when God stopped talking to me, it felt like such an insult. Because God was supposed to be the friend who doesn't leave. God's supposed to be the friend who doesn't ditch you. And I wasn't and because of my relationship with Jesus, I wasn't supposed to have to feel like I was going it alone anymore. But when I moved to England and this kind of period of spiritual dryness began, it really felt like God was leaving me alone, and it almost triggered that part of me when I was 10 and I felt like I had no friends and nobody to talk to. Or that me at age 14 when I came back from the summer holidays and was just completely bewildered by why your friends stop talking to you all of a sudden. And so, I thought I'd buried all those experiences or that they didn't really matter. But what mattered was that I sort of moved on from them. Like, I'm a well-adjusted adult. But no, actually, when I had experienced this feeling of deep, it's just long period of separation from God, and processing that and recognizing that I was angry about that, it kind of excavated these experiences that I had forgotten and from which I think needed some healing. And I thought they were trivial, but they really affected me, and they really kind of made me the kind of independent person who wants to be independent, who to not really need other people, the kind of person that I am right now. And so in that way, how we experience separation, particularly in the context of close relationships and close friendships, that can affect how we interpret new experiences, separation. So it led me to interpret God was cruel. Like that's an unfair thing for God to do. It was a cruel thing for God to do. And I knew it, and I wasn't, I actually wasn't angry of saying it, and I probably made other Christians feel uncomfortable, but I knew it was true. I knew I was really angry.
Yeah. When I hear you tell that story of, well, there's a couple of different movements in there, but when I hear you tell that story, particularly when you're talking about coming back and your friends not talking to you, that just really moved me. And I just felt that with you, just kind of holding it with you even now. And it just kind of goes to show that there is value in going back. And I think what we're learning, we have a therapist friend here in Kansas City, Dr. Todd Fry, who just reminded us that these memories don't get timestamped.
No.
And a part of the work of our is going back into our attachment story and seeing that moment is still alive because it was not transitioned. It wasn't really resolved in my life and heart. And so we timestamp it, grieve it, and are able to kind of move forward with it. That's a very vulnerable story that you just told us. And I really, really appreciate that. Thank you, because it is helping us get into our own stuff. Like when you're talking about your story, I'm hearing my story, and it's kind of bringing me all that stuff right into view too.
And that's the thing we don't realize, because we don't like to talk about it, that everybody has stories like that. The story of separation and loss is just a fundamental part of human life. There's nobody who hasn't experienced loss or separation in a way that has really affected them. So when we don't talk about it, we kind of forget about this part of our shared humanity. And it's a shame.
Yeah, and I think what you are embodying today, you kind of, even the story that you told about your own attachment with God and your own anger towards God, it sounded to me like something that's very familiar in my own life and in the lives of my friends, is this person who had their youthful zeal. You had your YWAM experience. We've had experiences like YWAM where it's like in passion, and everybody's all in, and the hope is high and the faith is great. And then there is this thing, it's nearly a rite of passage where you have to kind of move beyond youthful zeal into your mature years, where God is going to raise you up as an emotional adult. And these things, like you are talking about, these dark nights of the soul, are so useful, beneficial, necessary, unavoidable to get us to a place where God is trying to get us maybe back to that Cain moment where he was like, hey, I want to talk to you about why you didn't just answer me when I was wanting to attune with you, It's beautiful. Well, in your view, how can somebody who's currently, like right now, they're listening to your story, they're listening to all of your research, and they're like, I have got my big negative emotions that are at play in my relationship with God. There's trauma, suffering, pain, disappointment, isolation, abandonment, maybe some abuse, church hurt. Oh, there's nothing like church hurt. All of that going on in them. And they're like, I want to begin to process those feelings. How can they do that?
Well, first, I think it's a wonderful thing that they say they want to, because the first step to change is to want it. Yeah. And, pain and loss is painful. Yeah. And loss is a terrible experience. And our natural inclination is to avoid it. And when we avoid, we don't give ourselves a chance to heal, and we avoid pain and loss and these big negative emotions by denying it or minimizing it or blaming others or blaming ourselves, or we rationalize, we intellectualize, we distract ourselves from it. We get angry and hostile and defensive at other people about it. And I don't know why it is. I guess I do know why it is, but I'm saying this rhetorically. I don't know why it is that Christians think that negative emotions and negative experiences in life is not part of the Christian experience, because it
Right.
is so much a part of the Bible.
Yeah.
You know, in the Psalms, there are some early Psalms where you really do see the full range of human emotions, from great joy and ecstasy and celebration right through to deep despair in the Psalms and in Job. Psalm 13, how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and every day have sorrow in my heart? I mean, that's a person who's really suffering.
Yeah.
And I think, Christians will say, well, yeah, of course it's there, so it's okay, but you shouldn't feel it for that long. And I think
That's it.
that's sort of short circuits the work that God wants to do and needs to do in our lives. And so I think the first thing that Christians should do that could help is just to see the pain as it really is, and to not to cover over it, and to be willing to start digging deep to understand where it comes from. Now, it's easier said than done, and the fact that I can sit here and tell you about the dark night of the soul with a smile on my face is because I've gone through it, but
Right.
in the moment it's terrible, and part of me doesn't wish that feeling of separation from God for anybody.
Yeah.
And Mother Teresa, bless her heart, felt it for 50 years.
Right.
Yeah,
Her journals at the very end were pretty much that. They were.
that's right.
Yeah. Wow.
But being willing to see the pain as it really is and call it what it really is. Pain, sometimes from God, it feels like, is hard work. And so I think Christians should recognize that it's a brave thing that they're doing by coming to terms with the reality
Yes.
of your situation and the feelings that are there. So another thing that I think we can do is just to really notice what those feelings are, and try not to distract yourself from them, and learn to name them, both positive feelings and negative ones. And we don't just feel one or the other. It's not just two ends of a pole. Sometimes we can feel a mix of feelings, and some emotional states are more complex than others, and that's okay. And we have more words in our English language for negative emotions than positive emotions. And some research on the so-called basic emotions have identified, it's like, what are sort of the most fundamental emotions that humans feel? The most basic ones. Researchers have identified 5 or 6 of them. Some say 5, sometimes 6, but those are theoretical differences. But 4 of these are negative, and these are anger, fear, disgust, and sadness. 1 is neutral, which is surprise, and 1 is positive, which is happiness. And so we actually have a much more complex vocabulary and almost like a complex emotional landscape that for negative emotions than for positive ones. We've evolved to learn from negative more so from the positive, because negative events and experiences signal a need for change. When things go well, you don't need to change it. But when things are not going well and you're feeling that anger or that sadness or that frustration, it signals something needs to change. So noticing the complexity of your negative feelings and being able to name them and being able to being willing to learn from them is really important.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to recognize, and I've said this before, that having those feelings don't make you any less Christian. And so with that, maybe even try to be a little bit curious about those feelings in a way that kind of, you step back a little bit and you look at them and say, I'm feeling really sad. Or, this feeling of anger kind of sits in my stomach like a pit. But instead of engaging with it and kind of like, see if you could sort of step back and be compassionate about it and kind of look at it in a slightly detached but very compassionate way. And what I've found is that kind of helps me notice how my emotions change. Because when you're in the moment, you don't notice that emotions change, but they do, because they move around these feelings move around our bodies. They bring up certain thoughts, and then other thoughts come to replace them. And it's all, there's so much movement, but when we're stuck in being angry, stuck in being sad, we're just, when we're attached to those emotions, we don't observe that, we don't notice that they change. And when you notice that they change, then that's where you know that God can move in and create changes too.
Right. Yeah.
So I think a kind of curiosity about your life and your emotions, your emotional life, might be really revealing, because then you can kind of invite God to look at it with you.
Yeah.
You can interrogate them, but not in an aggressive way, to see if God would reveal more to you.
Yes.
Turn to them instead of turning away from them.
Love it. I love it.
So those are some things that I have done that I think is also reflected in kind of emotional regulation strategies that psychologists will talk about.
Yeah.
Another thing is just to allow yourself to protest and lament. Like,
I love this.
We don't allow ourselves, we don't give ourselves permission to do that, partly because it can be kind of destructive. Like if I'm protesting and lamenting, I might be lashing out at people that I love. I might be lashing out at God. And sometimes that, we don't think that's okay. And Lord knows life isn't easy. I think we've established that, right? Like life is not easy, and Christian life isn't any easier. And I think of Jeremiah, who wept over Israel in captivity, even though it was God who sent the Israelites into exile. So in Jeremiah 29, everybody loves Jeremiah 29 because of the famous verse, "For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans for you to prosper, plans for hope in the future." People love that. But what we've neglected is the preceding section, which is all about God saying, "I'm going to send you into exile while the city that you love is going to burn." But when I send you into exile, what I want you to do is build houses, plant gardens, eat the produce from the gardens, marry your sons and daughters, have children, make sure they have children, embrace living in exile, seek the welfare of the city into which I have called you into exile. You're to embrace the life that you don't want while I destroy your city. Like, that's really intense.
Yeah.
That section precedes the part that we love about plans and purposes. I mean, how awful is that if you were there and God said, go to a place where you don't belong, and the things that you love, the place that you love is going to get destroyed, but you're going to have to embrace that. I mean, how hard is that? And so Jeremiah lamented. He lamented for his people, and people protested. And that's the story of life. When life is hard, and especially when it feels like God might be the reason why life is hard, you should do what the psalmists and the prophets did: protest, cry, be angry, lament. Christian churches don't teach us to face God as we are and tell him what we think of him when pain and anger are eating at us. But in the Bible, God is always looking for the real person. He's looking for Cain's real face. He's looking for the real person who's willing to see him face to face, whether they're smiling or frowning or angry or crying or whatever emotional state they're in. So I think being honest and being real with that protest and that lamentation is really important.
Yeah.
And I think there's, we've talked about how churches are often not helpful. And so here's something for people who want to be helpful, for churches and people who are wanting to support people going through crises of faith.
I love this.
We need to recognize that compassion is much more helpful than theodicies. And when I say theodicies, I mean these sort of philosophical explanations for why bad things happen.
The painting on, like the sentimental painting on of like a scripture when someone's explaining they're having a hard time.
Right.
Yeah.
Theodicy is really the philosophical engagement with why evil exists in spite of a good and perfect God. And we can go blue in the face thinking of the philosophy, but that philosophy fundamentally doesn't help people. It's compassion that helps people.
Yes.
And and that means it's connecting, like we said earlier, it's connecting to the heart, not the head. Because the theodicy is about the head. It's the rational explanation, whereas compassion speaks to a person in their heart. And we Christians are really good at explaining things away. I think humans have that tendency anyway. So we humans have this cognitive bias to see the world as fair. And so we assume that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. So this is a kind of cognitive bias called just world belief. We also have another cognitive bias, which is called the fundamental attribution error, which you might have heard of before. This relates to how we explain how we explain things that happen. So, and especially this bias is when good things happen to us ourselves, we attribute it to something inside of us. We think it's because of our disposition or personality. Whereas when something bad happens to us, we chalk it up to the situation. It's something outside of us. Whereas we do the reverse for other people. So when something bad happens to somebody else, we tend to think it's because of them. But when something good happens to them, we think of it's because of the situation. So these two types of biases, this kind of preference for seeing the world as just, and this bias to attribute bad things to dispositional dispositions when it's about somebody else, makes us really terrible at being compassionate.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Because we think, oh, but it must be fair. Like if something bad happened to you, it must be because the world is fair. And when something bad happens to you, it must be because of something you did. Like those two biases really make us uncompassionate when bad things happen to people.
Right.
And we have a very strong tendency to want to explain the world in a way that confirms these biases. So, when bad things happen to other Christians, we want to try to find these neat theological explanations that square their suffering with our belief in a God who's just and good. And we see this in Job, actually. Job, who had everything taken from him, was weeping and protesting, and his friends come and they comfort him. And then as soon as they're done comforting him, they launch right into, well, Job, it's probably because you sinned. This is probably why. And they, have these elaborate, ways of invoking God and God's justice and God's orderliness in light of this chaos. But Job will have none of it. I will not stay quiet, he says. I will speak out in the suffering of my spirit. I will complain because I am so unhappy.
Yeah.
And you know what? I'm so glad he did.
Yeah.
Because it shows us that it's okay to do that. And we know the end of the story of Job. We know God comes and God does come back. But only after Job has been truly honest with himself and with God about how he felt.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. So compassion, not explanation, not theodicy.
Yeah.
The other thing is just to give, and this is true for Christians who are trying to support other Christians or Christians who are feeling they're in this period of suffering. Give yourself time. And God has all the time in the world, literally. And we, our lives unfold in seasons. And, we talk about seasons and as a way of sort of accepting what happens, but we don't change the seasons. We can't change the seasons that we're in. Seasons happen to us. And so give yourself time. And I really love it when in Ecclesiastes, when it says, we have a time to weep and a time to laugh. There's a time to mourn and a time to dance. And, time, just give yourself as much time as you need and don't try to short circuit what God is doing. Yeah. Another thing that could help a lot is to find a companion. And I think this is, again, where Christians do a disservice to each other, but not kind of permitting our friends to really process their feelings. We're really so uncomfortable with it, that with these negative emotions, that we just don't. We're only willing to walk with people a little bit. We're not really willing to walk with people through the depth and the long, through deep and long periods of suffering. But when we're not willing to be a patient companion, we rob other people of a chance to really confront God in a way that ultimately deepens their faith. So find a companion. I find that spiritual directors are really good at this. They just see all the colors and shades of Christian life, and they're just not threatened by it. And so if find a companion who you could just bear to talk to about it.
Yeah, I love what you said. You said that we rob people of a chance to really confront God in a way that might ultimately deepen their faith. Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you for that. Yeah.
And then the last thing, and this comes out of my own life. I was reflecting on this when I was thinking about the questions you asked me, is if you can bear to stay connected to church, to God, no matter how minimally, and try not to give up on the relationship with God, even if you want to, and to know that it's okay to not be friends with God for a while. It's okay to feel like you're just an acquaintance. And I felt that when when I was really angry at God, and for those many years of spiritual dryness, I felt like, I don't even know you anymore, God. Like, who are you? I thought I knew you in these different ways, and I don't think I do anymore. But I think, and I was never really aware of what I was doing, but I think I was willing to stay connected, even though I didn't know who I was connecting to.
Yeah.
And I have seen people who go through these sorts of crises, but they just give up. They say the relationship is not worth it if it doesn't feel this way, if I don't get this. And I think that's a real shame. So these, ways that I have found to stay connected are finding a church that I can bear to go to. So the one that I was telling you about, those midweek services where everybody's hands are up and they're singing those worship songs, I just couldn't go there. And I ended up going to, for probably a good number of years, going to an 8:30 liturgical Anglican service where there was no music and everything was just, all the liturgies were just spoken. There were maybe 3 people there. So I didn't have to say hi to anybody. I didn't have to kind of explain why I was there or why I was at that service. The whole thing was 30 minutes. But I could bear to be there because there were these liturgies that I felt like I could say them without not meeting them. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I wasn't in a place where I could pray to God extemporaneously. I couldn't say anything, but there were these words on a page in these books of liturgy where I felt like I could say it and not be lying.
And they held you. Yeah.
And so I feel like, to me at least, one thing that really helped is just to stay minimally connected. Because once you leave, it's much, much harder to come back.
Yeah.
And I say I really say this to churches who are trying to help, like, make it a place that people who are really struggling can bear to be in.
Yeah. Bonnie, you really have described a church that I would love to go to. It's certainly the kind of church that I want to lead, recognizing that compassion is more helpful than theodicies. We would use the word attunement, like attune with people before you just start, trying to explain things away, giving people time, becoming a church that can be a companion for people that are journeying through this. And then being a place where people can stay connected to God, no matter how minimally.
Yeah.
You have genuinely helped us today. Like, this is really, 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 really helpful. And I just can't thank you enough for.
It's a pleasure. It's a joy and a pleasure to share.
Yeah, for taking the time to do this and for helping us really find our way through the attachment stuff. And I hope that you'll consider yourself a friend of the Gathering Network. This new community that you just met today.
Nice to meet you all. I look forward to getting to know you better.
Yeah. And I hope that we can stay in touch because this has been genuinely helpful. How can people find your work? Like, if people wanted to kind of find a little bit more about what you're doing,
Yeah.
the Mockingbird article is kind of a big thing. It's been it's been seen quite a few times. So
yeah, well, and you're very kind to say that, and I'm so glad it's been helpful. So though most of my writing comes out through Mockingbird, and I'm planning to do more writing. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and one of the challenges for me writing for non-academic audiences is figuring out how to do it well. So I'm still learning the craft of writing for others who are not in the academy, and hopefully I'll do more of that. So I'm looking forward to doing more of that. But if you keep an eye on Mockingbird, I've got a piece that was in another edition of their magazine on anger. But the attachment one is the one that I think a lot of people have mentioned has been helpful. So I hope it's helpful to you too.
Yeah, and it has been. Thank you.
Well, if you're anything like me, that experience of hearing Bonnie's story brought up all kinds of stuff in you. So this morning, in our discussion, in our application and discussion, what we want to do is we want you to, if you're alone, journal this stuff. If you're with a friend, maybe one of you guys take a turn to do what we're going to do this morning. If you're with your spouse, then one of you guys give this a shot. If you're with your watch group, you could possibly split into groups. Or if you just as a group want to practice this with just one willing person in your group, that would be okay, because part of our discipleship this morning is not only in the telling of the story, but is also in learning how to be a good, empathetic listener, a safe listener. We are learning more and more that the end game of the Gathering Network is to become a safe and skilled church, to be able to move toward secure attachment with God, self, and others. That is at least one of the primary journeys that we are on as a church, because it will directly impact our work that God is calling us to. Here's how we're going to do it this morning, and this is the question. Firstly, I want all of you guys to just ask yourself this question. Did you identify with any part of Bonnie's attachment story? Did Bonnie's story generate any memories from your past of pain or loss that may have affected your patterns of relating? If so, if you are comfortable sharing, tell the memory to someone you are with. Again, a friend, a spouse, or your watch group. And describe, not only telling the story, but in telling the story, describe what you felt in your body as Bonnie was sharing and you were simultaneously processing your memory. Okay, so for those who are listening to a friend, a spouse, or a part of, a person in your watch group tell their story today, for those who are listening, if any dialogue begins to happen after they're sharing, ask only curious questions to mine out the gold of that experience. Do not prescribe help or try to fix the person. Allow protest and allow lament, and be compassionate. Do not offer theodicies. And at the end of their sharing, pause for a moment of silence by saying, "We are happy to recognize and hold these feelings with you in the presence of God today. Thank you for trusting us with such a significant memory." This is some good work that we're doing today, guys, as we are inching our way toward becoming a safe and highly skilled church at helping people move from insecure relating patterns to secure relating patterns with God, self, and others. All right, this is a high challenge today, but I believe in you guys. We're going to be doing it in my own group, and it's just going to get, we're just going to brave ourselves. We're going to motor through it so we can get to some attunement and healing today. I love you. I know you love each other, and I know you love me, and we're on the way, man. We're really doing it this time, you guys. God bless you guys.